Collaboration yet, and I'm hoping by the end you will understand why we gave it that title. So, as Matt said, my background has really pretty much always been in information management. It's been in a range of organisations that have either organised, presented, or in some way worked or managed information. I started off in academic libraries at the University of New South Wales. I actually had a stint in the US and worked with a software vendor that provided software to libraries. I was 8 years at Fairfax Media, and I've also worked for KPMG and also for the last few years at the ABC. I'm now at the University of Technology teaching, but my most recent experience has been at the ABC. So you can imagine the media organisations are really organisations that have a whole range of different projects and information interests. And over those years, I've really developed a particular interest in how people in project teams in organisations go about collaborating. So what makes successful collaboration and what makes a project successful as a result of that collaboration. So just to reinforce that, my key research interest is collaboration, but by collaboration, I didn't go into this research with a particular definition of anything. I actually wanted to find out what my participants thought this thing was. So what I'm really interested in is looking at what people in organisational teams, and by those teams I mean multidisciplinary teams, what they do to share knowledge of their own particular disciplinary area with their colleagues in order to make these projects succeed. So that's really the fairly burning interest that I've got out of quite a couple of decades of working in information management. So who did I work with in this research? So I decided, because I'd spent a lot of time in those other organisations, I had never actually worked in local government, so I was quite interested in going into a completely different sector, and so that it was completely fresh and new to me, but also I also was interested in working in a subject area that I didn't really know that much about. So I've had an interest in sustainability and biodiversity, and I've been involved in bush care projects and things like that. But I don't really know a lot about those details about that subject area. So here I had the opportunity to work with a whole new government sector, the local government sector, so a couple of councils. And I also had the opportunity to work with them on projects in a subject area that was all fresh and new to me. So one of the reasons I did that was that I realised a PhD takes about 5 or more years, and to sustain interest over that period of time, you've really got to be finding something new to be focusing on. So my two teams, I dealt with two project teams, and they were different in the following ways. So I had a single council that was working on a sustainability project, and it was a multidisciplinary team of people that came from all different areas of the council. So there were people from engineering, there were people from sustainability, there were people who planted trees, there were people who did budgets and finance and administration. So in the single council sustainability project, we had people from all the different departments of that single council. So it was a single council. So it was about intra-organisational knowledge sharing, just in the one team. The second project was a group of different councils with representatives working together on an externally funded project about biodiversity around a river. So they were both working roughly in the same subject areas that I didn't know much about, but the main difference is that one was single council with all the disciplinary areas from that single council, and the second one was all different councils represented with a whole lot of different people from different councils and slightly different areas of expertise. So in summary, they were teams of experts that were needing to collaborate and share their subject knowledge, or whatever knowledge we're talking about here, to make the project a success. Okay? That's the who, and this is the how. So what did I do? How did I approach those two council projects? So firstly, I ensured that I could attend and record project team meetings over a certain period of time. So over about 12 to 15 months, any project team meeting that they had, I attended. I sat in the corner of the room. I was fairly unobtrusive, but I did have a small recording device in the middle of the table. So I wanted to be there to see collaboration going on for myself. I didn't want to just talk to somebody and hear what they did to collaborate. I wanted to actually be there in that space, observing what people did and how they did it. I took copious notes, I recorded the meetings, and I transcribed all of the meetings myself, and I analysed that material that I collected. The second thing I did, I interviewed a whole lot of people from the project teams. So from one, I think I did 9 interviews, and from the second team, I did 5 interviews. So I talked to them about collaboration. That they gave me examples of how they collaborated. They gave me I asked for them for recent examples of how they collaborated. And so I'd obviously seen what they did and said during those meetings, but I also asked them in retrospect, what were the activities that you engaged in to collaborate with each other? And then the third thing I did, if I'd have just asked them those things, I would have got a certain amount. I'm kind of exaggerating here. There wasn't quite that much information. There was actually probably a quarter of that, maybe less. But I also was very lucky with my 2 project conveners. They were very interested in this project, and they were big collaborators themselves, and they were willing to show me websites to give me documents that I could look at as well. So they're the 3 techniques that I used, but I also want to stress that rather than just saying, what do you think, what do you do, tell me about collaboration, blah, 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 I was actually interested in their experience in particular. I wanted them to relay experiences. So I asked for a lot of examples. I asked them to give me details. If they went off on the side and said, oh, I'm one of those people that do this, I said, thanks very much for that, but what happened then? I was interested in what happened and how they experienced collaboration. So that was my focus. So what did I find? Just briefly, previous research in these 2 areas focus on collaboration, certain forms of collaboration. So in the information studies area, a lot of library and information research is really about information and knowledge as materials that we're circulating. So library materials and documents and things like that. So previous studies would suggest that collaboration was about sort of sharing documents and user studies of who had this and who did that. That's unfair to the library and information area. I'm just generalising here. But their focus is really information as thing, sharing things to collaborate. And then the other thing that probably a lot of you are familiar with because you may well work in knowledge management, a lot of knowledge management is focused on grabbing people's cognitive knowledge, somehow collecting people's cognitive knowledge in the organisation and recording it into automated systems so that we're capturing their knowledge, so that the organisation succeeds and continues to succeed even when, a lot of people with great cognitive knowledge leave the organisation. The focus of knowledge sharing, of knowledge management, is to collect that information and make sure we've got it recorded before people leave. So that's previous research that I looked at in my literature review, but in this study, collaboration, yes, was both of those things, but it was also a whole lot more. So what I found was that collaboration or knowledge sharing involved a range of different activities that came together to form collaboration or knowledge sharing. So some of those activities I've listed here are engaging. That's probably no surprise. People have to engage to collaborate. There was a lot of presenting. People collaborate by presenting their ideas like this or in a number of different ways. They problem solve, they support each other, but there are a couple of other interesting things there. People were often engaged in resisting. So given these projects were introducing new ways of working in the council, some of these people were involved in resisting those old ways. So one of the key activities in collaboration, even though it all sounds like a positive and let's go forward experience, sometimes it involves letting go of the old ways, and sometimes that takes a fair bit of resistance. And also influencing. That's not totally surprising, but some of the influencing was very strong marketing type influencing that was trying to convince people to go with them and move forward in order to collaborate. And I also found that collaboration involved not just those different activities, but there were different dimensions of it. Sure, people shared their cognitive, disciplinary and organisational knowledge. We all, I think, would have been surprised if they hadn't. But there were other dimensions of this. There were, yes, material, like information studies would support, but collaboration was an incredibly strongly social thing, also not surprising. But what I found surprising about this was there was a huge element of emotion. I expect these projects to be fairly cut and dried. You know, people had administrative things to do, they had tasks to do for the project. But I didn't expect the level of emotion that I saw from my participants. Both in the meetings, I observed it, but I also heard about it from them when they described their collaboration from a recent experience. I also found that there was stacks of humour. I mean, at the meetings, there were probably over, I think I counted them, over several meetings, there were at least 70 examples of people, being humorous, trying to sort of lighten the mood of the meeting and just joking and things like that. Some of that was very constructive. It wasn't just flippant, but people used humour in a number of different ways, which was quite significant. And then there were elements of power and trust. There were power and trust dimensions of what I found as well. So what were the insights that I got out of this? So some of the conclusions were that emotion and humour were actually critical to the collaboration process. Collaboration worked and flowed much better because of those emotional and humorous aspects. The emotion, humour, power and trust, I spent a long time trying to analyse and work out what do all these things have in common? What are they telling me about these results? And the results really seem to be pointing to to affect. And by affect, I don't just mean emotion. I mean the capacity to affect and be affected at a meeting. So it's that being affected by what's going on, but also attempting to affect other people in that collaboration process. So I found that affect was about moods and atmospheres. So we've moved from just these examples of emotion and humour, but that emotion and humour turned into really setting the mood or the atmosphere of the meetings and of the collaboration experience that people described. The other thing was that there was both positive and negative affect, and both types were sort of fairly, did lead to collaboration and quite constructive interactions in the teams. And I also found that organisational spaces, so the places where people met, and the sorts of things, the sorts of environments that people had these meetings and described, were really critical, and the amount of resources were also really critical to how successful the collaboration was. So because Matt stressed that we're really talking about the impact that some of this research is having in the real world, I just wanted to have 2 slides explaining, to me, the key impact for future research, for researchers in and outside universities, is a focus on people's experience. That is, my approach was to analyse people's experience, not their opinions. That seemed to be successful in tapping that a sort of effective dimension of collaboration. Also, that collaboration involves a range of activities, which I explained, engaging, presenting, etc., which also need to be considered, those whole range of activities in future information and organisational studies research. Collaboration isn't just sharing cognitive knowledge, it's a range of other activities as well, and they're all kind of ripe for future research. And that also, collaboration is multidimensional. It's not just cognitive or material, as previous studies might have focused on. It's got all of those other affective, emotional dimensions of dynamics of power and trust and things like that. But more importantly, for I know some of the people here are more interested in, well, as an information practitioner, what's the big deal? So my suggestions would be that managers in information management areas and services and organisations need to consider those aspects of affect when managing organisational change. That they do impact on whether your project is successful or not, or whether you actually are getting all of those different ideas from those ideas, knowledge, whatever it is, from those different areas. Because the more you can get that shared, I would argue the more successful the project will be. And certainly change management programs, because in actual fact, both of my projects, a huge element of change management there, moving from old ways of the organisation to new ways. Also, successful collaboration requires that multidimensional approach, which I said. The context of collaboration, and this was a really key thing that came out, context was extremely important. So context of collaboration is critical. So the space that you collaborate in, the mood that you're able to create in that atmosphere, and sort of the affective atmospheres that happen when people are collaborating we need to pay attention to those, because if they're really sort of inappropriate for sharing people's knowledge, it's not going to work, and also the project will probably be less successful. Emotion, humour, trust and power dynamics are indicators that collaboration is working or that it's not working. And I think this is really worth pointing out that negative emotion, sort of negative affect, is not always destructive, but sometimes what seems like negative affect, like whinging, complaining about other people, etc., sometimes that's actually quite functional. It's about affect because it's negative affect, but sometimes it can actually be constructive for the project, which that was a surprise for me. So that is pretty much it. I think I'm probably right on time or a little over, but happy to take questions.
Okay, do we have any questions?
Could you tell us an example of the negative affect being useful?
Yeah, so there was a particular instance where one of the project team members in the single organisation came back and was very upset from a meeting with their manager. And what had happened was the manager had attended the project team meeting the previous week, and he had gone to his manager as an aside later and said, "Oh, what did you think of the meeting? Wasn't it amazing?" And the manager said, "It just seemed like a cult. You just seem like you're a member of a cult." So he came to the next meeting, and even I could see, and I didn't know him very well at that stage, that he was like really down, and they were trying to engage him, and said, what's the matter? And he said, oh, I just had this terrible meeting with my manager and, you know, blah, blah, blah. He said, and they coaxed him to say, yeah, my manager's just said he thought we were members of a cult. So he's getting a lot of pressure not to be engaged in the meeting. But in actual fact, by the end of the meeting, the fact that he had shared that he had been open and honest about it, there was a whole lot of support that came from all around the room about, wow, you know, that's amazing that you told us that, because, you know, of course nothing goes outside this room, but fantastic that you gave us that. So there were lots of examples of kind of that you thought on the surface seemed like negative experiences that actually in the long run were quite productive. I mean, moaning about certain other traffic committees and things like that was actually to some extent quite positive for this project, because it just meant that they paid attention to what the traffic committee was doing, and they were able to think, well, yeah, their old ways of working, so how are we going to inspire new ways of working, and how are we going to inspire the traffic committee to change over time?
Dean, when you were talking about in the slide of the findings, you said that the previous research was about capturing knowledge and sharing documents, and I got the impression that you were saying that view of collaboration is very static and about things, whereas you're more interested in collaboration as an action. Would that be fair?
Yeah, in some ways, yes. I mean that
activity.
Yeah. So the particular theoretical approach that I took actually a particular theorist that actually did see things really quite in quite a static way. But as I did my literature review and worked with and looked at other theorists from the same area, they were more interested in how collaboration unfolded. So you move from more of a static approach to, well, this collaboration's unfolding and it never really stops, because collaboration just continues. And it continues after projects finish. Like in all of the organisations I've worked in, you might finish the project, but then you have a post-implementation review, you have another project, you know, comes out of that. So the idea that sort of, you know, people's practices in reality are always unfolding. They never really stop. We're always moving forward to some extent, yeah.
And speaking of cults, you've just stumbled onto the practice theory cult amongst UTS searchers.
I'm interested in your point. You said that the second last dot point was emotion, power, trust, and humour. Those dynamics were indicators that it's working or not. So could you elaborate slightly more on that in terms of what are the indicators that it's working and what are the indicators that it's not?
Well, because these are the dimensions of collaboration, so any one of those four things can be negative or positive, and the positive part of it or the negative part of it could actually make the collaboration work or not. So I've given an example of when negative affect was actually quite productive for the project. I mean, it might not have done much for the traffic committee, but it was certainly good for the project. But I guess what I'm saying there is, as managers of information services, we should be more aware of those sorts of dimensions of collaboration, and if we want it to be positive, pay due regard to those things. So I will give you an example. One of the meetings was held in a very, very old town hall building, in a very dark room with no technology, because it was a historic building, which of course I loved, but not great to have a project team meeting in. So there was no wiring. So, you know, the convener had to sit there with his laptop. Very dark room, was a rainy day. It was all just that atmosphere, the affective atmosphere of the place was really bad. And it just put you in a bad mood as soon as you arrived. So I guess what I'm saying is, as an information manager, we need to just, if we're trying to inspire people to get involved in collaboration or want to really make the projects a success, just think about where you're sending these people to meet. You know, think about maybe the people that you select as project team members. You know, if they have particular clashes or personalities, that probably not. You know, I know people do think about these things, but I guess the thing that really came out of the research was that as a manager, these things, you've got to pay due regard to these things so that you can set potential projects up in the best possible way. That's it.
Two questions from the back. I think Hilary was first and then Guy.
Dean, I wonder if you could link those indicators back into the activities that you outlined earlier, and in particular, to think about resisting and influencing, how those are, because earlier you said that resisting and influencing were key activities involved in collaboration.
Yeah, okay, so I might be able to do that just by let's just take humour. So in order to resist the old ways of working, for example, the traffic committee, people actually made humorous jokes about, you know, how old-fashioned the traffic committee was, and there was a whole lot of humour that was built on that resistance of the traffic committee. Similarly, there was a whole lot of humour around how we're going to influence other people in the organisation. We're going to, what's an example? Well, even just inviting the senior managers to their project teams. Yeah, why don't we take them to the site? You know, I will take them to a site and drop them off in our streetscape, and you know, it'll be like going to the zoo. They can go and experience it for themselves and things like that. So, yeah, those. As I moved through these dimensions of knowledge sharing, there were certain of those activities that were associated with some and not others, I guess is the point you're making, Hilary.